diving into a story that's starting debate across Africa and beyond. China's massive Belt and Road Initiative, promising to build roads, railways, and power plants. China's investments are reshaping the continent's future, but critics warn, are these projects a lifeline or a trap? With soaring debts, questions over who really benefits, and fears of growing political influence, many wonder if Africa is gaining true independence or trading it for Chinese control. To unpack all this, we are joined today by Justus Nam, an expert on China-Africa relations and Belt and Road initiatives. Welcome, Mr. Nam. Kindly introduce yourself to our audience. Mr. Nam, can you hear me? Kindly introduce yourself to our audience. Mr. Nam, we couldn't quite hear you. If you can repeat the introduction.
Hello, Susan.
Hi.
I can hear you clearly.
Okay, I can hear you now.
Thank you so much, Susan. Thank you for having me. My name is Justus Nam, and I'm International Affairs and Public Policy Analyst. The moment I'm based in Nairobi.
Welcome to the bulletin, Mr. Nam. Now, we dive right into the topic. Can you kindly give us an overview of what the BRI initiative is?
Thank you so much. So the BRI basically was launched by President Xi Jinping of China in 2013. It is a global connectivity and investment framework that aims to rewire global trade routes with China at the center. It's part geoeconomic strategy and part geopolitical repositioning by China. So Africa has a dual role in the BRI. Firstly, as a resource supplier. So basically, China secures vital inputs like oil from Angola and Nigeria, and cobalt from the DRC, which are key to its electrical vehicle ambitions. Also, Africa is a market frontier with over 1.4 billion people. So Africa offers China demand for low-cost goods and a platform for expanding digital infrastructure. So you also have projects like the SGR, the Standard Gauge Railway in Kenya. You have the Suez Canal Economic Zone in Egypt and the Djibouti Free Trade Port. Basically all this reflect China's deepening strategic footprint. So the BRI is not only in Africa, but it also encompasses Asia and also Europe too, and the Americas. So the BRI is not just about roads and railways, it represents a fundamental reordering of geoeconomic relationships. So while Africa's got huge infrastructure gaps, this also represents real opportunities and it exposes vulnerabilities as well. So the BRI is about infrastructure mainly, because Africa is basically so deficient of infrastructure, and for Africa to get its to increase its intra-trade deficit, it has to have more infrastructure connectivity. So if I can give you an example, there are only 43% of Africa's roads are paved, and 30% of that is in one country, that is South Africa. So you can see the huge deficits that we have. And if you see even a country like the Democratic Republic of the Congo, which is probably the biggest country in Africa, probably after Algeria, and there's only 3 centimeters of road per citizen. Well, if you compare that with China, you've got almost 3 meters of road per citizen. So if we see if you look at the whole picture, for Africa to really shift its aggregate in terms of trade and commerce, it needs to build infrastructure, and that's where the BRI comes in.
Africa-China relations, Mr. Nam, are currently entering a new chapter. Tell us about that, especially in light of the BRI projects.
Well, so you have to basically look at the evolution of China-Africa relations. So there have been three key phases. So phase one was in the 2000s, where what is basically about resource diplomacy. This was basically epitomized by Angola-style oil-backed loans, where China was offering infrastructure, but without government strings. Second phase was from 2013 onwards, when 2013 was basically the inception of the BRI, and you had where that was the diversification phase. So the BRI basically expanded into industrial parks like Ethiopia's eastern zone. You have also digital platforms too, like smart cities in Zambia, which were basically promoted by Huawei, and also education. So phase three basically has been the post-2020, yeah, and that's where we entered the recalibration phase. This is basically the phase where we had there's been so much issues about debt concerns, which has now basically shifted towards public-private partnerships. So most of the deals that are now happening between China and Africa tend to are towards PPP, and also COVID-19 also accelerated what was called China's debt deferral diplomacy. So China's FDI to Africa peaked at around 5.4 billion in 2018, but dropped to around $3.4 billion. That was by 2022. This was basically mostly owing to political volatility and debt distress. So, for example, in Kenya, these shifts have been evident, for example, in the second phase of the SGR project.
Yes, yes.
We can recall probably last month, when President Ruto was in China. So basically, now to have the second leg to all the way from Naivasha to Malaba. So basically, the current shifts are basically demonstrated where China has become a more cautious lender, and also African countries have become also much more savvy in terms of negotiation strategies. So also China has also leveraged its African partnerships basically into political capital. So diplomatically, China basically now enjoys near unanimous support from African countries, African governments. So even in contentious issues like Taiwan and Xinjiang. So actually, China now needs Africa for a lot of political diplomatic purposes, especially even at the UN. In the last 5 years, we've had around half a dozen of Chinese officials who've been elected to important UN bodies, to head the UN bodies. Also militarily, China has established a overseas base, military base in Djibouti.
Yes.
Yes, and also China basically is now one of the top military arms suppliers to the continent. Militarily, yeah. That is the only base that China has basically outside China. Yeah. So narratively, this influence, China also influences African political discourse because China has basically been lagging behind in soft power. So you have institutions like the CGTN Africa, China Global Television Network, which is now Africa, which is now based in Nairobi, and also you have Xinhua. Yeah. So but however, on the converse too, African agency is also emerging. So I remember Ethiopia's Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed negotiated debt relief by threatening to move to other alternative partners. China also cancelled the Chinese port project, which was almost projected to be around $10 billion. This was over sovereignty concerns. Yeah, so you can see there's been a lot of China's basically becoming also very savvy. What they've moved towards what are called small and beautiful projects. So previously they used to do all these large-scale projects, but they're now moving to small and small, what they would call small and beautiful, which are much more greener.
Yes, yes.
Yes, yeah.
They're calling it the smart projects. That's right,
Smart.
right? Yes. Now, you talked about Djibouti and the military presence of China there. China commits to a non-interference in Africa's internal affairs. And we've seen
Indeed.
Africa shifting their support for China, especially in the One China policy. So how is the power dynamics playing out there, Mr. Nam?
So basically, the power dynamics at the moment are very crucial because you can see the global geopolitical shifts that are happening within the world. And Africa basically is sort of like the bride, if I may put it mildly, that everyone is coveting. So you've got the Americans through the military arm of the State Department, AFRICOM. The head of AFRICOM was in Africa the last week. There was a conference in Africa.
Yes.
So you have the UAE, all this. You have Turkey. You have the European Union. So Africa is basically being where everyone is looking for resources. So at the moment, African countries are also trying to get the best deals possible out there. So in terms of infrastructure, basically at the moment it's only China that has been doing a lot of the large-scale projects in Africa. But the European Union created what is called the Global Gateway in 2021. We had the United States having the Build Back Better when President Biden was in power. So basically, Africa is trying to leverage alternatives. And because African countries of Africa also, the African Union also created what was called the Africa Continental Free Trade Area, which was basically to harmonize things about trade and infrastructure and free movement of people, free movement of services, free movement of goods. So the BRI is also an alternative and is also complements the FCFTA for the FCFTA to succeed. Most countries in Africa have ratified the AFCFTA. I think with probably one country that has not done that. So it's still a long way to go. A lot of barriers on the way to success. So African countries with China, with the BRI, they're trying to leverage all this together. Despite having even floating infrastructure bonds to diversify funding. And I think that's okay.
Now, okay, let's shift the focus to debt sustainability, Mr. Nam. And China has played a pivotal role, especially in financing infrastructure gaps in Africa, right? Are we gaining as a continent, or are we still in the debt trap diplomacy? Do you align yourself with that? Do you believe in that diplomacy, Mr. Nam?
So debt has basically been the crux of BRI criticism. Yes. So in China, for example, like in Kenya, the SGR consumes over 60% of its revenue on debt servicing.
Exactly, yeah.
Yes. Was still 85% of the operating profits reportedly go to Chinese firms, right? So yet there have been what are called the fears of asset seizure. Asset seizure fears. But I always think these are often exaggerated, right? Because you see, for example, like Uganda's Entebbe Airport, the Zambia's ZNBC, you've got the port in Mombasa, they have not been taken over. But if you look at headline warnings over the last 3, 4, 5 years, whereby there have been these fears that all this China is going to nationalize all these infrastructure projects, but it has not come to pass.
That is not what happened in Sri Lanka, Mr. Nam?
No, actually it did not happen. It did not happen. That's the Hambantota port. No, it did not happen. Actually, they restructured the contract.
Okay.
Because it will not be prudent on China's part to start seizing all these infrastructure projects when the BRI is a long-term project, right? So politically, politically and diplomatically, it will not be in China's benefit, right? However, there's the hidden cost lies in loan conditionalities. So many BRI loans require Chinese contractors, which limit local job creation and knowledge transfer. So in my opinion, the solution lies in having greater transparency, because at the moment, about 40% of African governments only publicly disclose their loan terms. Also, African countries also need to leverage the alternatives, like I said earlier, in terms of, for example, like the EU's global gateway and floating infrastructure bonds to diversify funding.
But won't the BRI project, Mr. Nam, bring over dependency to China?
So dependency has always been. You have to remember, most of Africa's countries, most of the debt owned by African governments are actually Western debt. Most of it held by bondholders in the Western world, and also by Western institutions too. So China is not only, it doesn't. Most African governments don't own Chinese debt, right? So I think that's why in the last few years also Chinese diplomats have been given the power and the leeway, what is called well-forwarded diplomacy, to go out there on social media and fight these allegations. Because previously Chinese diplomats were always not very voluble. They used to be basically not out in social media to rebutting all these allegations, but now they're out there trying to rebut all these allegations. So we have to have, I think, be clear that most of the debt that African governments own, actually most of them are also historical and colonial debts. Yes.
But you'll agree with most of them are China debts, mostly in Kenya. Kenya contributes a major part in Chinese debt globally.
Kenya?
Yes. If I'm getting my statistics correctly.
Actually, Kenya is not even, I think, not even probably the top 5 of African debt holders. I think Ethiopia, you've got Mozambique, you've got Zambia, Djibouti. There are a few other countries that have more Chinese debt than Kenya.
Okay.
Yes.
There are a lot of BRI projects, Mr. Nam, in Africa, right? And many are happening in our communities. How is BRI incorporating communities in their projects? Are we benefiting from them? Are the communities benefiting actually?
So actually, I think local participation remains one of the BRI's weakest links.
Yes.
Yes, because if I take, for example, the SGR in Kenya, I think over 5,000 families were displaced.
Yes.
And many are still facing delayed and insufficient compensation. Similarly, for example, like even in the DRC, you've got Chinese mining farms which are basically clashed with indigenous communities over land rights. Yes. So I think even in my research, I recommended there should be mandatory. There should be transparent environmental and social impact assessments, which are what I call ESIAs, and the strengthening of local civil society to basically to monitor projects effectively. However, there are also signs of progress. For example, like in the Ethiopia-Djibouti railway, they basically increased local employment in phase 2 compared to phase 1. In Senegal too, I remember it is called the Diamnidio Industrial Park. That was co-designed with local labor unions. So yes, so community inclusion, that is an area whereby they still there should be much more progress between government to government, and also to decentralize these projects to the local communities.
In your own point of view, how can that be accomplished?
Well, so like I said, so we should have stakeholder consultations, have involve communities, the public. For example, like we have, for example, like the part of the SGR was going through the national park, for example, in Kenya, right? You have people, local communities. You have the wildlife community, for example. You have local governments. Now we have county governments. County governments should be primary stakeholders, not because of the budget, because everything is done locally, right? So I think local participation is very, very important.
What lesson can Africa learn, Mr. Nam, from the BRI projects?
So lessons that Africans can learn from BRI projects. So I think African countries should raise their bargaining power, right? Because like at the moment, I think there are few countries like Rwanda, which now basically insist on technology transfer and environmental clauses, right? Also, we should have also limit digital risks, or what I should put in quotes, digital colonialism risks. Because, for example, you have Chinese platforms which enable African innovation. They tend to centralize control over infrastructure and data, right? Yes. So I believe, or in my opinion, the African Union should coordinate a continental BRI framework to standardize labor rights, environmental protections, and data transparency across all member states. And I think the AFCFTA can also help in this, and also try to empower the RECs, regional economic communities, like the EAC, SADC, ECOWAS, and the rest too. And we should also stress the importance of cultivating Chinese language and their diplomatic expertise within African institutions to ensure better negotiation outcomes. Because at the moment, what Kenya, even other African countries lack is capacity in terms of negotiating, right? For example, you find all countries like China, the European Union, the United States, negotiation because they have the capacity. So when it comes to negotiating deals, they're better in terms of they look at the details better than we do. So that is one area that Africa can learn from.
And why do you think that is so? Is the problem our leaders, or?
It is multifold. Of course, leadership is important. It's multifold, but we also need to invest in human capital. We need to invest in research and development. At the moment, I don't know of any African country that even invests even 1% of its GDP to research and development. So we need to invest more in terms of our schools, in terms of training people, children, in terms of building institutions. Last week I attended the launch of there's African School of Governance in Nairobi, which so the president, Professor Kingsley Ogalu, has been touring African countries. So the African School of Governance is basically it's been located in Kigali, and it was basically created by President Kagame and the former Prime Minister of Ethiopia, Haile Mariam Desalegn, basically to train African leaders, African policymakers in terms of leadership and governance. So human capital, we need to train a lot of more human capital, and even exported expertise. Things like technology is important. Basically, that's where the world is going to.
Right now, there are currently global rivalry between China and the Western nations. Will that affect the Africa-China relations?
Well, the rivalry between China and the United States has been there for a while.
Yes.
Just like we have also China, the US and the Soviet Union, it used to be announced Soviet US and Russia. So I think African countries also become cuter in terms they're much more cuter now at playing both camps to getting the best benefits from both. And for African governments, I don't think it will be bad for them to try and put all their eggs in one basket. They get the best of both worlds because, well, the United States is still the biggest economy in the world, nominally, and the United States has got a lot of soft power, diplomatic power, military power. China, on the other hand, is the biggest in trading partner for most African countries nowadays, African governments. Yes. So it will not be to the benefit of African countries to be like they were during the Cold War when they put all their eggs in one basket. Right? And I think African governments are now having more leverage too. So African governments I think going forward, African governments, they're going to have because they need infrastructure in industrialization, and it is at the moment it's only China that can finance the infrastructure in the industrialization for African countries. Right? Also, the United States offers other things too, for example, right? So it is important for Africa to not be hedged into only one camp going forward.
Corruption and environmental violations have often been linked to the BRI project. How can Africa safeguard itself from this risk while engaging with the Chinese investors, Mr. Nam? Yeah,
so that's also very important too. So this part, China had they had a pledge, or what was a green BRI pledge in 2021, that the BRI was going to be greener. They made this pledge in 2021. However, there are still coal projects which persist, right? So hydropower, for example, while cleaner, has created new risks. For example, like we have Ghana's Bui Dam in Ghana. This has caused a lot of displacement and siltation issues. Right? So part of also what I've recommended is that we have to have sustainable solutions, which include aligning the BRI with Agenda 2063 targets. We have also, for example, the Great Green Wall Initiative with the African Union. We also have to promote circular economies. For example, like where we have got China's proposed electric vehicle battery recycling program in the Democratic Republic of the Congo. Coming to Kenya, Kenya's BRI engagement must also prioritize green financing. You also have to have climate resilient infrastructure and regional energy integration. So sustainability and climate goals has been a major issue in terms of the BRI not meeting its targets.
For your concluding statement, Mr. Nam.
My concluding statement?
Yes.
So, well, basically, my closing statement is that China's growing footprint in Africa is a reality. But how Africa responds to it is still very much within our control. And, Africa must shift from being a passive recipient to an active co-designer of the BRI. That means demanding transparency, setting climate priorities, and placing youth and local communities at the heart of development. So we also have to underscore that infrastructure is not neutral. Infrastructure shapes foreign policy, it orders geopolitics, and defines futures. So we owe it to ourselves as Africans and the next generation to make sure that those futures are equitable, sustainable, and Africa-led. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Nam. We hope to see you again.
Thank you so much, Susan, for having me. Yes. Thank you so much. Thank you. Give it a good day.
Good day, Mr. Nam.